The Joint Expeditionary Force, a military task force founded by 10 northern European nations as a response to an increasingly unstable geopolitical climate. JEF for short, comprises some of Europe's most advanced formations, gear and personnel. And in this video we'll have a look at what it really is. I'm Tuomas, a former officer in the Finnish Defense Forces, and today we'll look into the alliance within NATO, which is creating a template for nations with similar challenges to work around the cumbersome politics of the organization. In 2012, the Chief of the Defense Staff of the United Kingdom General Sir David Richards came up with the idea of an elite force within Europe's northern areas who could focus on the issues that by then had started to crop up in Northern Europe: Russian sabotage, encroachment and saber rattling. By 2015, 7 nations had joined the initiative: the UK, Denmark, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Netherlands and Norway. And by 2017, Finland and Sweden had also joined. The last nation to join JEF was Iceland in 2021. Now, you may say, Tuomas, this is just an alliance within an alliance, but there's more to JEF than that. Firstly, the 10 nations of JEF are all considered some of the staunchest defenders of Western social democracy in the world, while other nations in Europe and NATO seem to be fast-tracking towards reactionary politics. These 10 nations have thriving democracies, often fronted by being near the top in indexes for freedom, wealth, life expectancy, and liberty. It is in the interest of these nations to work together to defend their way of life and form an insulation against the sort of political chaos seen elsewhere within the alliance. On most indexes, you can think of that measure quality of life. You'll generally find all 10 JEF nations within the top 20, while the forces who tend to be more supportive of Putin's Russia, like Slovakia, Hungary, and certain other nations, are on a free fall on the same indexes. Secondly, while NATO is the most powerful military alliance that has ever existed on Earth, it is not without its faults. Since the war in Ukraine broke out in 2022, the issues surrounding Russia-friendly politicians sabotaging votes within the NATO Council has become really apparent. Viktor Orban, Robert Fico, the isolationist movement within the Republican Party in the US, and the ever-looming threat of Russia's assets within the populist right in countries like Germany, France, Bulgaria and Romania shows a split which needed to be addressed. The answer to the problem for these 10 nations was the Joint Expeditionary Force, an alliance where each member commits some of its best formations, naval assets, and equipment to create one of the most effective military formations on Earth. While some of these nations may not be impressive on their own, the extremely well-equipped and trained brigades and groupings within JEF are extremely impressive. Now, enough of the political babble. Let's look at some of the specific personnel and equipment of the force from each nation, and how powerful JEF really is. Being the founding member of the force, the UK is committing some of its most capable assets. The backbone of the British contingent is its 2 aircraft carriers, HMS Queen Elizabeth and HMS Prince of Wales. On these 2 impressive carriers, the UK has the space for 40 aircraft, generally F-35s, Chinooks, Apaches and Wildcats. Pilots from other JEF nations have been training to land on these 2 ships, which will form the command hubs for the force once deployed. With its 2 flagships comes the Royal Navy's infamous carrier strike groups, generally with 1 Type 45 destroyer, a Type 23 frigate, and an Astute-class nuclear submarine. While these Royal Navy ships are impressive on their own, the UK hasn't stopped there. It is also supplying JEF with some of its best formations, including the 4-5 Commando Royal Marines, famed for its involvement in amphibious landings, sabotage of German World War II assets, and some of the most daring raids during World War II, including in occupied Norway and Denmark. More recently, this unit is rumored to be training Ukrainian service members and special operations formations in Ukraine. Apart from their more famous cousins in the British Armed Forces like the SAS and the SBS, this battalion is top of the line. In the Air Department, the British Air Force is supplying the necessary aircraft for their carriers, likely for around half of the available space, with allies filling in the rest, meaning around 40 aircraft of different configurations for their 2 carriers. The Netherlands is following the UK's lead and have supplied many of its most elite assets to JEF. Judging by JEF's recent drills in the Baltics and Nordics, It has supplied at least 10 F-35s, 1 Walrus-class submarine, 1 De Zeven Provinciën-class missile frigate, and several different amphibious warfare ships and crafts. With their naval and air assets, the Dutch have committed large parts of its excellent Royal Netherlands Marine Corps, with its entire contingent of special operators and at least 1 battalion-sized infantry combat group, complete with their armor, AFVs, and modern equipment. As with the British contingent, the Dutch bring to bear its winter warfare specialists, special forces, and high-end landing crafts, including its high-tech MS Rotterdam landing ship. The Dutch and British make up the vanguard states in the force, meaning that they are farther away from Russia and hence have focused extensively on naval and air assets. The JEF nations focus more heavily on specialist land formations the closer we get to Russia. Norway seems to have focused on lending the naval strike groups its extremely capable missile corvettes, which are the fastest corvette in the world, armed with the deadly naval strike missile, along with its coastal Jaeger special forces contingents, at least 1 armored unit complete with CV-90s and Leopard 2s, as well as an undisclosed number of F-35s. Sweden, for its part, is engaging at least 1 each of its corvettes and famous submarines, as well as several units of its marines, along with a large contingent of CB-90 fast attack boats and crews. Sweden, along with Finland and the Baltic nations, likely have the most skin in the game here, as JEF will actively be working to stop Russian cable sabotage, as we discussed in a previous video. Last week, I did my first whole voiceover on the channel when we discussed Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia's armed forces upgrades. And these 3 nations will likely add in mainly ground elements and naval patrol boats to JEF. Neither of them have a very large navy, but what they lack in this department they make up for in well-trained ground armies. When JEF trained in the Baltics earlier this year, in particular their special forces were used extensively for naval boarding operations and amphibious combat simulation. Denmark will likely contribute with either 1 of its air defense frigates and several of their marine infantry units, though it is unclear what sort of capability Denmark will send yet, as this has changed in every JEF exercise. Denmark has some of the most well-trained frogman companies within NATO, and have extensive training for the kind of action that might be needed when intercepting Russia's ghost tanker fleet. Whether or not Denmark might hold back and control the passage to the Baltic Sea rather than actively engaging further into the Baltic is unclear. Last but not least, we have Finland. In the many JEF exercises that have gone on so far, Finland has provided several of their patrol craft and missile boats, and the force currently deployed to the Baltic to secure infrastructure is pictured with the Hamina-class missile boats regularly. My old colleagues in the Finnish Defence Forces tell me that they've put several of their most elite naval infantry brigades on notice to join JEF, and that the infamous coastal Jaegers are heavily involved in planning, and I expect that Finland will also allocate several aircraft to JEF. Before we close off this segment of the current capabilities of JEF, I just want to state that JEF isn't a set force, which means that each member nation can and will change who they deploy under the JEF framework depending on the operation they're joining. Within the British military community, JEF is often spoken of as one of the likely organizations that could be deployed to Ukraine to enforce a ceasefire, which obviously would require different units than the many amphibious units currently in the lineup. So, to summarize, JEF will consist of at least 10,000 elite infantrymen, somewhere along the line of 100 tanks and armored vehicles, 2 aircraft carriers, 2 to 4 frigates, 5 to 7 corvettes, several mine countermeasure vessels, at least 3 submarines, and somewhere along the lines of 80 aircraft. While those numbers aren't huge, you have to remember that this force will at all times consist of the best each nation has to offer and include some of the most frightening special ops teams in Europe. Currently, JEF's counter-sabotage operation in the Baltic seems to be focusing heavily on using technology to track threats. The force has invested heavily in artificial intelligence and space assets to locate possible dangers, whereby special operations teams, fast attack craft and helicopters are deployed to the areas the systems flag to the force. Looking ahead, JEF is focusing on integrating emerging technologies such as cyber defense and unmanned systems into its arsenal. The challenges it faces include navigating the complex political landscape of international defense and ensuring continuous funding and resource allocation from its member nations. Despite these hurdles, the JEF remains a critical component of Europe's collective defense strategy, and for the 10 nations within the force, it is an alliance within NATO between nations that cherish democracy and standing up against an ever-increasing threat of divisive politics. I expect that in the near future, Poland will likely also join the force, as the goals and morals of Poland often match the Nordics and Baltics on key issues like Russian aggression, defense spending, and how to deter Russian sabotage. As the shadow of uncertainty looms over Europe, the Joint Expeditionary Force stands as a beacon of collective security and determination. United by common values and a shared resolve, these 10 nations have transformed JEF into a formidable power on the world stage. Every drill and alliance forged through JEF has been a testament to what unity in the face of adversity looks like. As things are about to get very interesting on the world stage, JEF remains vigilant, ready to deploy at a moment's notice to defend peace and uphold international law. We hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, we'd be honored if you hit that like button. Have a great weekend, everyone.